The humidity inside Madison Square Garden on this particular Monday night in November 2026 was suffocating. A heavy blanket of anticipation that had slowly curdled into exhaustion. The crowd had been fervent for 3 hours, their voices hoarse from chanting for the main event of the evening. Rhea Ripley defending the World Women's Championship against a surging Tiffany Stratton. It was the kind of match the company had built for months, a clash of generations that was supposed to define the next era of the division. Michael Cole and Corey Graves sat at the commentary desk, their suits slightly rumpled, their voices straining against the deafening roar of 18,000 people. Yet, despite the electric energy that usually accompanied such a high-stakes contest, there was an underlying tension that didn't feel part of the script. It was a subtle unease, a frequency that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, making the security guards at ringside shift their weight nervously and glance toward the entrance ramp more often than usual. Midway through the match, the colossal LED screens that wrapped around the arena flickered. It wasn't the dramatic programmed blackout that signaled a surprise debut, nor was it the sharp, rhythmic pulse of a pyro malfunction. This was a dirty, jagged glitch. A momentary tear in the digital reality that turned the faces of the audience into distorted pixels of gray and white. The commentary team paused, confusion bleeding into their professional cadence. Cole tapped his headset, frowning as he looked at the production monitors, which had momentarily gone black. The crowd, sensing the technical error, quieted down, their cheers replaced by a low, murmuring hum of uncertainty. In the ring, Ripley and Stratton slowed their pace, exchanging a genuine look of confusion that the cameras caught in high definition. They were professionals, trained to work through anything, but the atmosphere had shifted from a sporting event to something far more precarious. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder in the sudden drop of volume, a mechanical drone that felt oppressive. Fans in the front row stopped looking at the ring and started looking at the rafters, as if expecting something to fall. It was the feeling of a storm front moving in, the drop in pressure that makes your ears pop before the thunder cracks. The referee, usually invisible in the periphery, stepped out of the corner and spoke into his wrist mic, his face pale and serious. He wasn't receiving instructions. The line was dead. For the first time in years, the wheel-oiled machine of the WWE production had stalled, not with a bang, but with a terrifying, hollow silence. The massive Titantron, usually a beacon of branding and color, went completely dark, leaving the arena lit only by the house lights which flickered on, bathing the ring in an unflattering, sterile white glow that exposed the sweat and the fear in equal measure. This wasn't the show anymore. The show had stopped, and reality was beginning to bleed in. There was no music. That was the first thing that signaled to everyone that this was not a scheduled part of the broadcast. In the world of professional wrestling, silence is the enemy. Every entrance is heralded by a wall of sound, carefully curated theme designed to elicit a Pavlovian response of joy or hatred. But tonight, the only sound was the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots against the steel ramp. From the blacked-out tunnel, a silhouette emerged, but it was wrong. The silhouette lacked the signature high ponytail that had been a trademark for nearly a decade. It lacked the sequined jacket, the skipping cadence, the bright, infectious smile that usually greeted the fans. The figure walked with a slow, predatory gait, shoulders hunched forward, hands loose at their sides. As the figure stepped into the sterile house lights, a gasp rippled through the arena collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was Bianca Belair, but it wasn't the Bianca Belair they knew. She was dressed in plain black cargo pants and a fitted tactical vest, stripping away the pageantry of the EST persona entirely. Her hair, once her weapon and her crown, was gone, sheared down to a close. Severe buzzcut that emphasized the sharp, hardened angles of her face. She looked exhausted, not in the physical sense but in the spiritual sense, like someone who had carried the weight of a legacy until it crushed the joy out of them. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't acknowledge the children in the front row wearing her merchandise, the little girls with ribbons in their hair who were now lowering their signs in confusion. Her eyes were locked on the ring with a terrifying, dead-eyed intensity. The commentary team remained silent, paralyzed by the visual before them. There was no "the est is here" from Michael Cole. There was no snarky remark from Graves. They were just men watching a ghost walk toward them. The crowd didn't know how to react. They didn't boo because this didn't feel like a villainous turn. They didn't cheer because there was nothing celebratory about the woman marching down the ramp. It felt intrusive, like walking in on a private funeral. As she climbed the steel steps, the metal clanging echoed loudly in the hushed arena, not over them, moving with them, moving with a heavy, deliberate lethargy. Ripley and Stratton, two of the most dominant women in the world, backed away instinctively, as they weren't selling fear for the cameras. They were genuinely unsettled by the void radiating from the woman who used to be the heart of their division. Bianca stood in the center of the ring, looked at the hard camera, and for a fleeting second, her lip quivered not with sadness, but with a simmering, uncontrollable rage that felt dangerous to witness. The violence, when it started, was shockingly efficient and devoid of flair. Bianca didn't perform a move. She didn't execute a KOD or a suplex. She simply walked up to the referee, who had moved to intercept her, and shoved him. It wasn't a theatrical push. It was a display of raw, disrespectful power that sent him skidding across the canvas, collapsing in a heap near the ropes. Ripley, realizing the match was effectively over, stepped forward to confront her, shouting something that the microphones didn't pick up. Bianca didn't even blink. She struck Ripley with a closed fist, rigid, stiff right hand that connected with a sickening, meaty thud that echoed through the silent arena. Ripley went down instantly, clutching her jaw, her eyes wide with shock. This wasn't a wrestling punch. It was a street fight blow, unpolished and ugly. Stratton, seeing the champion fall, froze, her character breaking as she looked towards the back for help. Bianca ignored her entirely, turning her attention to the ring itself. She walked to the turnbuckle, the padded corner that held the ropes in tension. With a calm, methodical demeanor, she produced a heavy wrench from her tactical vest. The crowd murmured, realizing she wasn't there to fight an opponent. She was there to dismantle the stage. She began to unscrew the top turnbuckle hook. The tension on the ropes was immense, thousands of pounds of pressure, but she worked with a manic strength, her muscles coiling and straining visibly. Security guards rushed the ring, 5 of them sliding under the bottom rope. Bianca turned, swinging the heavy wrench with a feral scream that finally broke her silence. The guards scattered, terrified by the weapon and the unhinged look in her eyes. She returned to the turnbuckle. With a final, ear-splitting crack, the steel hook gave way. The top rope whipped back with lethal velocity, snapping across the ring like a giant whip. The sound was like a gunshot. The ring posts shuddered, and the entire structure groaned. The top rope now lay limp and dead on the canvas. The visual was jarring. The sacred square circle, the stage for all their dramas, was broken. But Bianca wasn't done. She went to the second turnbuckle, then the third. She was systematically deconstructing the very platform that had made her a star. The symbolism was violent and undeniable. She wasn't just ruining a match. She was tearing down the apparatus of the industry. The ring collapsed in on itself, the ropes tangling around the fallen referee and the shocked wrestlers. She stood amidst the wreckage of steel and canvas, breathing heavily, the wrench hanging loosely from her hand, surrounded by a destroyed ring that could no longer host a fight. She had literally broken the arena's ability to function. Backstage, the scene was a kaleidoscope of panic. The gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, just behind the curtain, was usually a place of controlled chaos. But now it was a riot of genuine confusion. Producers were screaming into headsets that were no longer connected to anything. Triple H stood by the monitors, his face a mask of furious disbelief, barking orders to cut the feed. But the feed remained live, broadcasting the destruction to millions of homes. Cameramen, usually invisible observers, were being jostled by security teams rushing toward the entrance. The fourth wall had been shattered so completely that the staff didn't know whether to protect the talent or protect the brand. In the locker room area, wrestlers huddled around monitors, their mouths agape. The separation between good guys and bad guys evaporated as they watched their colleague dismantle their workplace. The medical team was scrambling, trying to get to the ring to check on Ripley, but the entrance ramp was blocked by a wall of confusion. Reports were coming in that Bianca had locked the production truck out of the system before walking out, explaining the glitches and the inability to cut to commercial. It was a hostile takeover of the broadcast. In the hallways, you could hear the shouting of executives, the frantic calls to legal teams, and the murmurs of the roster who were whispering that this was a mental break, that the pressure had finally snapped the strongest woman they knew. The camera followed a shaken cameraman running back from ringside, the lens shaking violently. capturing the raw, unpolished terror of the moment. He passed Montez Ford, Bianca's husband, who was being held back by 3 officials, screaming her name, tears streaming down his face. He wasn't playing a part. He looked terrified for her. This wasn't a storyline where the authorities would come out and arrest her in a scripted sequence. This felt like a crime scene. The feed finally cut not to a commercial, but to a generic technical difficulties screen, the silence of the black screen serving as the loudest moment of the night. But the damage was done. The image of the collapsed ring, the limp ropes, and the bald, dead-eyed woman standing in the center of the debris was burned into the retina of the wrestling world. Backstage, the silence that followed the feed cut was heavy. No one moved. No one spoke. They just listened to the distant, confused murmuring of 18,000 people in the arena who had just witnessed the death of a superhero and the birth of something incomprehensible. The Est was gone, buried under the wreckage of the ring she had just destroyed with her bare hands. In the days that followed, the wrestling world did not buzz with excitement. It sat in a state of somber reflection. The footage of Bianca Belair standing amidst the broken cables became the most viewed clip in the history of the platform. But the comments weren't filled with fire emojis or hype. They were filled with concern, analysis, and a strange sense of grief. The incident forced a conversation that the industry had avoided for decades. It wasn't about a heel turn. It wasn't about a new gimmick. It was about the cost of being the best. For years, Bianca had been the pillar of excellence, the woman who smiled through injuries, who carried the PR campaigns, who skipped down the ramp while carrying the weight of representation and expectation on her shoulders. The destruction of the ring was the physical manifestation of a burden that had become too heavy to carry. Critics and fans alike began to deconstruct the EST moniker. Fastest, strongest, best superlatives that demanded perfection every single second of every single day. By shearing her hair and destroying the stage, Bianca hadn't just interrupted a show. She had rejected the demand for her own perfection. She had broken the arena to show that the stage was too small to contain the reality of her humanity. The wrestling shows that followed felt different. The entrances felt less vibrant, the matches less consequential. A shadow had been cast over the spectacle. The fans realized that they had consumed her charisma until there was nothing left but the raw, hard skeleton underneath. The final shot of the video essay that analyzed this moment didn't end with a prediction of her return or a fantasy booking of her next match. It lingered on a slow-motion frame of her face just before the feed cut. It wasn't the face of a villain. It was the face of someone who had woken up. The incident of 2026 wasn't remembered as the night Bianca Belair went crazy. It was remembered as the night the show became too real. And as the screen fades to black, the viewer is left with a single, uncomfortable question that lingers in the silence. When we demand our heroes to be larger than life, do we have the right to be surprised when they decide to tear the life down just to breathe? The arena can be rebuilt, the ropes can be replaced, but the illusion that these athletes are invincible characters, that was broken forever.